The attic smelled of cedar and old paper, and the particular dust of 40 years, and the single bulb threw long shadows across the boxes I had been avoiding my whole married life. It was January in Dubuque, and through the little gable window I could see the snow coming down over the rooftops, and below me, in the warm part of the house, my husband Frank was sitting in his chair, watching a program he would not remember by morning. We were selling the house. We had to. And so I had finally climbed up into the attic we had been filling for 4 decades, and I was kneeling among the boxes when my hand found the old camera, and inside it, when I turned it over, was a roll of film that had been waiting there, undeveloped, since before our children were born. I had not wanted to go up into that attic. I had been finding reasons not to for months, ever since the doctor and the children, and finally my own exhausted body, had made it clear that we could not stay in this house, that 2 floors and a yard and a furnace that needed tending were more than I could manage on top of managing Frank. The attic was the last of it, the accumulated sediment of a whole shared life, and every box was a small grief waiting to be opened. The children's school art, Frank's tools, the Christmas things we would not have room for. I had been dreading the sentiment of it. I had not imagined that the attic also held a live wire, a thing that would reach down out of Tisija Divitsat Vasimdesat Dva and take hold of me. You go up expecting to mourn the past gently, box by box, and instead the past grabs you by the collar. I'm going to tell you what was on that roll of film when I finally had it printed, 40 years late, in the worst winter of my life. I am going to tell you about the photographs of a young man who no longer exists, and about one picture in particular that he took on purpose and hid inside that camera for someone to find someday, and how it reached me at the exact moment I needed it, when the someday had quietly, terribly arrived. But to understand what those pictures did to me, you have to understand what is happening to Frank, and to me, and to the 50 years we built and are now, in the cruelest slow motion, losing. My name is Rosemary. I am 65 years old, and I have been married to Frank for 43 of those years. He is 68. And 3 years ago, by small degrees that we explained away for far too long, the man I married began to disappear. They have a clinical word for it, and we use the word, but no word prepares you for the actual experience of watching the person you have loved, your whole adult life, be carried off a little at a time, like a beach going out with the tide, so slowly that on any given day you can tell yourself the water has not really moved, and then one morning you look up and half the shore is gone. It started so small that we laughed about it. Frank, who had balanced the books for a lumber company for 30 years, double paying a bill, then forgetting the word for the thing you plug into the wall. We called it getting older. We called it stress. He got lost driving home from the hardware store he had driven to 1,000 times, and sat in a parking lot for 2 hours, too proud and too frightened to call. And that was the day the laughing stopped. There were tests, and a long hallway, and a doctor, about the age of our son, saying the word to us gently across a desk, and Frank reaching over and taking my hand in the waiting room afterward, fully himself in that moment, and saying, "Well, Rosie, we will just have to make the good days count, won't we?" He does not remember saying that now. I remember it for both of us. That is most of what I do now, remember things for both of us. I want to describe what it is, loving someone through this, because I think it is one of the loneliest forms of love there is, and almost nobody talks about it honestly. Frank is still here. He is in the chair downstairs. I can make him tea and hold his hand, and he is warm and breathing, and sometimes, for a few golden minutes, entirely himself, cracking the same joke he has cracked for 40 years. And then a door closes somewhere behind his eyes, and he looks at me with a polite, slightly worried friendliness, the way you look at a kind stranger, and he asks me when Rosemary's coming home. I am Rosemary. I am standing right in front of him. And I have learned not to correct him, because it only frightens him, so I say, "Oh, she will be back soon." And I go into the kitchen, and I hold the edge of the counter until I can breathe again. Nobody tells you about the grief that has nowhere to go. When a person dies, the world gives you a way to grieve them, a funeral, casseroles, people who say they are sorry. But Frank has not died. He is right there. And so I grieve him in secret, a little every day, while feeding the very person I am grieving. And there is no casserole for that, no card, no permission. I mourn my husband in the kitchen with the water running so he will not hear. And then I dry my eyes and carry him his tea and smile, because the alternative, letting him see my grief, would only frighten a man who already spends most of his hours frightened and lost. It is the strangest arithmetic of love I have ever had to do, to mourn someone and reassure them in the same 5 minutes, and I do it 10 times a day, and I had no idea in 43 years of marriage that this was a kind of love I would have to learn at 65. So you can understand why, when I found that camera in the attic, my first instinct was fear. The last thing I thought I needed, in the middle of slowly losing my husband, was a box of old grief, a roll of pictures from a happier time designed to break my heart by comparison. I almost left it in the box. I almost taped the box shut and let it go to the new owners or the dump with everything else we could not take to the small apartment we were moving into. The one place left that we could manage, that I could manage, now that managing had become a thing I did alone. Our 2 children live far away, a daughter in Oregon and a son in Atlanta, and they call, and they love us, and they carry their own guilt about the distance like a stone in the pocket. And I have mostly stopped letting them hear how hard it is, because there is nothing they can do with the knowing except hurt. So I carry it by myself. The nights are the worst, when Frank wakes confused and afraid in a house he no longer recognizes, sometimes convinced I'm an intruder, and I sit on the edge of the bed in the dark and talk him down the way you would a child waking from a nightmare, except the nightmare is just the present, just the life we are in now. By the time the move landed on top of all of it, I was running on some reserve past tiredness that I did not know I had, and I climbed into that attic more depleted than I have ever been. Which is, maybe, I have come to think, exactly why the film was able to find me when it did. You have to be that empty before a thing like that can fill you. But I have never in my life been able to leave a thing unknown. So I put the camera in my coat pocket, and the next day I took it to the one shop left in town that still develops film, run by a patient young man who looked at that ancient roll like an archaeologist handed a relic. It took 2 weeks. He warned me that film, that old, never developed, stored through 40 years of attic summers and winters, might be nothing, might be fogged and black and lost. I told him to try anyway, and I want to tell you about the 2 weeks of waiting, because they did something to me. Knowing those images existed, latent, sleeping in that little canister, images of Frank and me from a year we could barely remember, started to feel like the opposite of the disease. The disease was erasing the past, and here, possibly, was a piece of the past that had been perfectly preserved in the dark the entire time, immune to forgetting, waiting. For the first time in 3 years, I felt something that was not grief when I thought about the past. I felt suspense. I felt hope, which is a strange and almost unbearable thing to feel in the middle of a long goodbye. I found myself, those 2 weeks, doing something I had not done in 3 years. I let myself remember on purpose. The disease had made remembering dangerous, because every memory came with the unbearable comparison to now, so I had quietly stopped, had let the past go gray to protect myself, which I see now was its own small surrender to the illness, me forgetting in self-defense while he forgot from sickness. But the film cracked that open. Knowing those exact moments were sitting preserved in a canister, I started reaching back for the year around them, our tiny first apartment over the laundromat, the way Frank used to sing badly in the shower, the night we brought our daughter home and stood over the crib at 2 in the morning, just staring at her, both of us terrified and amazed. It hurt. But it was a clean hurt, the hurt of loving something, not the dirty hurt of losing it. And I had not felt the clean kind in so long, I had forgotten they were different. The young man called and said they had come out, most of them, better than he expected, and that I should sit down when I looked at them, in the kind voice of someone who has handed a lot of people their own history. I did not sit down. I stood at the counter of that little shop, and I opened the envelope, and 40 years fell on me all at once. There we were, 1982, our first year married. A camping trip to the lake we took that summer and had told stories about for decades, but had no pictures of. Because we always said, the film never came out. We must have lost the roll. We had not lost it. It had been in the camera the whole time, in the attic, over our heads, for 40 years. And here it was. Frank at 28, brown-haired and lean and laughing. A young man so vividly, completely present, that it stopped my heart. Frank holding a fish up to the camera with that grin. Frank asleep in the tent with his mouth open. Me, at 25, in a swimsuit I do not remember owning, caught mid-laugh, looking at whoever held the camera, which would have been Frank, with an expression on my face I had not seen in the mirror in a very long time. The expression of a woman who is completely, uncomplicatedly happy, and does not yet know that anything could ever be otherwise. I went through them one at a time, standing at that counter, and each one was a small resurrection. There was a photo of our hands, just our two hands on the picnic table, his big and mine small, both of us wearing the cheap wedding bands we could barely afford that year, the bands we upgraded a decade later, and that I now wish we never had, because these were the real ones. There was one of the lake at dawn, mist on the water, that Frank must have gotten up early to take while I slept. Because he was like that, he noticed beauty and wanted to keep it, a quality I had completely forgotten he had, because the disease had buried it under so much fear and confusion. Every frame gave me back not just a moment, but a trait, a piece of who he was. And I stood there reassembling my husband out of an envelope of paper, the man underneath the patient, and I understood how much of him I had already let the illness erase from my own mind without meaning to. I want to try to explain what it was to see him like that, the young Frank, in the middle of this. For 3 years I had been losing him so gradually that I had started to lose even my memory of who he had been before, the way a word you stop using slips away. The sick Frank, the confused and frightened and fading Frank, had slowly overwritten the other one in my mind, until some days I could barely call up the man I married underneath the man I was nursing. And here, in an envelope, was that man, returned to me whole. Not a memory, which the disease can corrupt, but a photograph, fixed and true, evidence. This happened. He was this. We were this. The pictures argued back against the erasing in a way nothing else had been able to, and I stood in that shop and wept for the second time that month, except this time it was not only grief, it was reunion. The young man behind the counter, who could not have been 30, came around and brought me a folding chair and a paper cup of water, and did not say anything, just stood near me while I cried over a stranger's photographs, which I suppose by then were not a stranger's. He told me later, when I could speak, that developing very old film is the favorite part of his job, and also the hardest, because he is so often the first person to see a face that is gone, or changed, or forgotten, and that people fall apart at his counter more weeks than not. I thought about that on the drive home, this gentle young man who spends his days as a kind of midwife to other people's recovered past, handing the living their dead and their young selves across a counter. The whole world is quietly full of people doing tender work we never think about. He charged me $11. I have thought about him 100 times since. It strikes me that almost everything that saved me in this story was made by someone young. A young man developed the film. A young Frank took the pictures and wrote the message. Even the girl in the photographs, the happy, uncomplicated girl I needed so badly to be reminded I had been, was young me. There is a thing the young have that they spend so carelessly and that we only learn the value of much later, which is the assumption that there will be a future to send things to, that it is worth making a record, taking the shot, holding up the silly sign, because someone will be there to receive it. Old Frank can no longer believe in the future, but young Frank believed in it enough for both of them, believed in it on his behalf across 40 years, and that belief, mailed forward, is holding up the both of us now. The young are always quietly rescuing the old, usually without ever finding out they did. But I have not told you about the last photograph yet, the one at the end of the roll, The one Frank took on purpose. I went through them slowly. The lake, the fish, the tent, the two laughing children we still were. And then I came to the final frame, and it was different from all the others. And it took me a moment to understand what I was looking at. It was a picture of Frank, but not one taken by me. He had set the camera up on something, a rock or the car hood, and set the timer, the way you did in those days, and run into the frame. And he was holding up a piece of paper, a torn page from a notebook, with something written on it in his own young, careless hand, held up to the lens on purpose so that whoever one day developed this film would read it. I remember the camera, now that I think of it, being the kind you had to wind, and I have a dim memory of Frank fussing with the timer on a rock that whole trip, me teasing him for being so serious about his little photo project when we could just ask a passerby. He would not let me see what he was doing for that last shot. He made me go down to the water. I had completely forgotten that, a 40-year-old afternoon stored nowhere in my mind, and the photograph reached back and handed me even that, the memory of him shooing me off so he could keep his secret. He kept it for 40 years. He kept it past the point where he could remember keeping it, past the point where he could remember the lake, or the trip, or eventually me. The secret outlived the man who made it, which is the most a secret can ever hope to do. The young man in the Photoshop had read it, of course, when he printed it, and he was watching my face now with tears standing in his own eyes. The paper in young Frank's hands, in handwriting I would know anywhere, the handwriting that now can barely sign his own name, said this: "Hello, from 1982. If you are seeing this, we got old. Remember this day. We were so happy." He had made a message in a bottle out of a roll of film. A 28-year-old man, goofing around on a perfect day at the lake, had thought, with that strange offhand wisdom the young sometimes have without earning it, to send a postcard forward through time to the old people he and I would become. And the old people had received it. At the precise moment, one of them was forgetting that the day, or any day, or my name, had ever happened at all. I read those words, "Hello from 1982. If you are seeing this, we got old. Remember this day. We were so happy." And the strangest thing happened, which is that I started to laugh even as I was weeping, because it was so completely him, so exactly the goofy, tender man I married, to make a joke and a love letter out of the same gesture, to be silly and profound in the same breath. He would have thought it was very funny, sending a message to old people. He did not understand, at 28, that he was sending it to a woman who would be reading it alone, while he sat in a chair downstairs, unable to read it himself. He thought we would open it together, two laughing old people remembering a lake. He could not have known he was really writing to me alone, that the WE in "we got old" would have come apart by the time the message arrived, that I would be the only one left who could receive it. And yet somehow it was still exactly, perfectly, the right thing to have said. I had to be helped to a chair after all, because do you understand what that roll of film was, arriving when it did? Frank, the young Frank, had reached across 40 years to do the one thing the disease was stealing from us. He had remembered for us. He had said, "Remember this day. We were so happy." At the exact moment, his own mind could no longer hold the days, or the happiness, or me. And so the remembering had to come from somewhere else, from before, from him, from the version of him that the illness could not touch, because it had been sealed in a canister in the dark since 1982. It was the kindest thing anyone has ever done for me, and he did it before I had even met the woman I am now, before any of this, as a careless joke that turned out to be a lifeline. I am not a religious woman, not really, but I have turned that timing over and over, and I cannot make it ordinary. 40 years that roll sat in the dark. It could have been developed at any point, the week after the trip, or never, lost to a dump. If I had found it 10 years ago, it would have been a sweet, uncomplicated keepsake, a nice picture for the mantle. If I find it 10 years from now, it may be too late to matter to Frank at all. Instead, it surfaced in the one narrow window where it could do its full work, late enough that I had begun to forget the young Frank myself, early enough that the old Frank could still be reached by it. Of all the winters, it came in this one. I have stopped trying to decide whether that is chance or something else. I have decided it does not matter which. The gift is the same either way, and you do not interrogate a gift like that. You just get down on your knees, which is where I ended up, and you receive it. I brought the pictures home. Frank was in his chair, in one of his foggy, quiet evenings, and I did not know if it would mean anything to him at all. The doctors are careful not to promise that anything reaches them on the bad days. But I knelt down next to his chair, the way you kneel by a child, and I held up the photograph of the two of us at the lake, young and laughing, and I said, "Frank, look, this is us." And he took it in his unsteady hands, and he looked at it for a long time, and I watched his face, not hoping. I had learned not to hope. And then he put his finger on the young woman in the picture, on me, mid-laugh in that forgotten swimsuit, and he said, very softly, "That is my Rosemary. That is my girl." I cannot fully describe what those 4 words did to me, kneeling on that floor. That is my girl. For 3 years, I had been slowly becoming a stranger to him, a kind, helpful stranger in his house. And the loneliest part of all of it, lonelier than the nights, lonelier than the grief in the kitchen, was the fear that the Frank who loved me was simply gone, that the love had been erased along with the memories, that I was tending a body the love had already left. And here he was, with his finger on a girl in a 40-year-old photograph, telling me that the love was not gone at all. It had just moved. It had retreated, with the rest of his truest self, into the deep room at the back, and it was still there, intact, fierce, instantly recognizable, attached not to the gray woman beside him, but to the girl at the lake, who was also me, who is still me, underneath. He had not stopped loving me. He had only stopped being able to find me in the present, and the photograph told him where to look. He knew me in the photograph. He could not always find me in the chair beside him, the gray-haired woman of 65 who fed him and bathed him and grieved him while he still lived. But he knew his Rosemary, the girl at the lake, instantly, with total certainty, because that Rosemary lives in the part of him the disease reaches last, the deep old part, the part where the most loved things are kept. I have read since that this is common, that for many of them the distant past stays vivid long after the present has gone, that a man who cannot remember his lunch can remember his wedding day. And I understood, kneeling by that chair, that the photographs were not just for me. They were a door. They were a way back to a Frank who could still find me if I went to meet him where he still lived, which was 1982, at a lake, with a fish and a tent, and a girl he loved so much he sent a message about it into the future. I had spent 3 years making the same mistake, I realized, the mistake the whole world makes with this disease. I kept trying to drag Frank forward into now, correcting him, orienting him, telling him the date and the year and who I was, as if the kindest thing was to keep forcing him to live in a present that only frightened and shamed him. The photographs taught me to stop. They taught me that he was not lost, exactly. He had simply moved house, gone to live in an earlier decade, and that I had a choice. I could stand in the present calling to him across a distance he could no longer cross, or I could go where he was. So I learned his address. It is 1982. It is a lake, and I have learned to pack a bag, so to speak, and go and visit my husband there, in the country of the past, where he is still the king, instead of standing in the doorway of the present demanding he come back to a place that has nothing left for him but fear. So that became our evenings. I had the whole roll printed large, and I filled the new small apartment with them when we moved, our young faces on every wall, and in the evenings I would sit with Frank and we would go to the lake. I stopped trying to drag him into my present, where he was lost and frightened, and I started going to live in his past, where he was happy and whole, and knew exactly who I was. He cannot tell you what he had for breakfast, but he can tell you, looking at that photograph, about the fish he caught and how the water was cold, and how his girl laughed. And when he tells me, his face is young again, and for those minutes I have my husband back, summoned out of 40 years ago by a roll of film he loaded with a message for this exact moment without knowing it. There was one evening I will keep for the rest of my life. We were sitting with the lake photographs, and Frank was telling me, in the present tense, the way he does when he is back there, about how he was going to teach our daughter to fish at that lake someday. Our daughter, who is now 41 with children of her own. And then he stopped, and he looked at the photo of the two of us laughing, and then he looked up at me, the real me, the gray-haired me, and something flickered. Some bridge held for just a second between the girl in the picture and the woman in the chair, and he reached over and touched my cheek and said, "You are still her." And then it was gone, the bridge closed, and he asked when Rosemary was coming home. But for 1 second, he had held both of us in the same thought. The girl and the wife had understood that they were the same person, and that he loved her across all of it. 1 second. I live on seconds like that now. They are enough to live on. I did not know a person could live on so little and call it a rich life. But you can, it turns out. You absolutely can. That was last winter. Frank has declined further since then. The tide does not come back in. I know how this story ends, and I am not going to pretend otherwise, because the honest version is the only one worth telling. There will come a day, maybe soon, when even the lake and the fish and his girl will go, when not even 1982 will reach him. I know that. But I also know something I did not know before I climbed into that attic. I know that he loved me so completely, so consciously, so early, that a careless boy of 28 thought to preserve it on purpose and aim it at me across his entire life, to arrive exactly when I would need proof that the man fading in the chair had once been a man who sent love letters through time. The disease can take the memory of the love. It turns out it cannot take the love. The love was already mailed, it already arrived. I have had to learn a hard distinction this year between memory and love, two things I had always assumed were the same, or at least inseparable. I thought, when this began, that as his memories went, his love would go with them, that you cannot love what you cannot remember. I was wrong. The memories are going, are mostly gone. The love is not memory. The love is something else, something that lives lower down in the body, in the deep room, in the way his hand still finds mine in the dark before his mind has caught up to who I am. He forgets that he loves me and loves me anyway, continuously, wordlessly, the way his heart keeps beating without remembering how. I did not know that was possible. I find it the single most consoling thing I have ever learned, that love and memory are not the same organ, and that when the disease takes the one, it cannot always reach the other. I have thought so much this year about that message. Hello from 1982. Remember this day we were so happy, because Frank, at 28, did the thing that almost none of us do. We are all of us walking around inside our good days without photographing them, without marking them, certain we will remember, certain the happiness is permanent, or at least that the memory of it is. And it is not. Memory is the most fragile thing we own. I am watching it dismantle the strongest mind I ever knew. And the only thing that has stood against that dismantling in our house is the handful of images a young man bothered to make and a message he bothered to send, because some wiser part of him knew, even at 28, even in the middle of being happy, that happiness needs to be written down, that we will need the proof someday, that someday we always get old if we are lucky, and the getting old takes things. We had so many good days I never photographed, 43 years of them, the ordinary mornings, the kitchen radio, the 1,000 suppers, the way he would reach for my hand in the car without looking, all of it gone now into a fog I cannot retrieve, and he cannot either, undocumented, unmarked, trusted to a memory that has betrayed us both. I would give a very great deal for a single photograph of one ordinary Wednesday from 1995. Frank reading the paper, the kids fighting over cereal, nothing happening, everything happening. I have almost none of those. We only ever photographed the occasions, the birthdays and the holidays, the days we already knew were special, and we let the real life, the daily, ordinary, holy life in between, go by unrecorded because it felt endless. It was not endless. None of it was endless. I know that now, in a way, no one can know it until the proof is being taken from them. So, I want to say something to everyone listening, and I want to say it with some urgency, because I have learned it the hardest way there is. Take the picture. Take the picture on the ordinary good day, the camping trip, the kitchen on a Tuesday, the faces of the people you love while they still have those faces and still know yours. Do not wait for the special occasion. The good days are the special occasion. You just cannot see it yet because you are inside them, and you believe they will last. Develop the role. Write the message. Mark the happiness while it is happening, because memory will betray you, your own or theirs. And on some winter day decades from now, the only thing that will be able to argue back against all the forgetting is the proof, fixed and true, that it was real, that you were there, that you were so happy, and that someone loved you enough to make sure you would not lose it. And I want to say something to anyone who is where I am, walking a husband or a wife or a parent down the long road of forgetting, which is so much more common than our silence about it would suggest. I want you to know two things. The first is that you are not alone in it, even though it is the loneliest thing in the world, because there are so many of us, holding the edges of so many kitchen counters, grieving people who are still alive. And the second is that you may be able to find them, even when they seem gone, if you stop trying to pull them into your present and instead go and meet them in their past, in the deep old rooms where the most loved things are kept the longest. Bring the photographs. Go to the lake. Your person may still be there, young and whole and waiting, ready to point at a girl in a forgotten swimsuit and say, with total certainty, "That is my Rosemary, that is my girl." So that is the story of the camera, and the undeveloped role, and the message my husband sent me across 40 years without knowing he was sending it. I climbed into an attic afraid of old grief, and what I found instead was a young man who had loved me enough to mail the proof forward to the exact winter I would need it most. I wanted, while Frank is still here to be the reason for it, to tell the whole of it out loud, with you. If this story reached you, and especially if you are loving someone through the long forgetting, or if it made you think of a good day you have never bothered to photograph, I would be so grateful if you left one word in the comments. Just the word film. It helps me know these stories find their people, and it would mean a great deal to me to know that somewhere out there, because of Frank, someone picked up a camera on an ordinary happy day and made the proof that will save them decades from now. Subscribe for new stories, real patterns, full narratives, the long game. Two small pieces of wisdom from this one before I go. The first is the one Frank gave me at 28, without knowing it. Take the picture. We move through our happiest days half asleep, certain we will remember them, and we are wrong every time. Memory is not a vault, it is a sieve, and the good ordinary days run through it first, and one day you reach for them and your hands come up empty. Or worse, you watch the disease empty them out of someone you love. The only defense is to make the proof while the happiness is happening. Photograph the ordinary Tuesday. Write down the joke. Mark the good day as a good day out loud, while you're inside it, because you will not believe, until it is gone, how badly you will one day need to be able to prove that it was real. And the second is for those walking someone down the road of forgetting. Stop fighting to keep them in your present, where they are lost, and learn to visit them in their past, where they are whole. The love does not live in whether they can recall your name today. The love is older than the names, kept in the deepest room, and it is reachable for far longer than the disease lets you believe, if you bring the old songs and the old photographs and go to meet them there. Frank cannot find me in our living room, but he can find his Rosemary at the lake in 1982, and so, for now, that is where I go to be with my husband, and it is enough, and it is everything, and I will go there with him for as long as that door stays open. Take the picture, develop the role. Someday, the people you love will begin to forget, or you will, and the only thing that argues back against the forgetting is the proof that it was all, every ordinary day of it, real. I'll see you next time.